My name is Natalie Augusto Filion. Can I just know who's controlling the screen?
It is me.
Is that you, Greg? Okay, thanks. I just want to welcome everyone to this breakout session. We should be going for about an hour. And if you could advance the slide, please. Our plan here is essentially to create as much space as possible for folks to share their opinion. And because there's so much content in this particular session, what you'll notice is that we're going to create a few sort of choose your own adventures for this group. But before we do that, what I wanted to start with is just a very quick overview of our guidelines, which we reviewed at the beginning of the meeting, but I know not everybody joins, right? Not everybody was able to join right at 4 p.m. So the request is that if you're not speaking, kindly mute yourself. So we make sure we don't have any interruptions from, the normal traffic, construction, babies, dogs. And if you don't mind, we'll ask you to consider turning off your camera so that we're able to have anyone who needs American Sign Language interpretation have easy access to that view of the person offering ASL interpretation. We will be doing our best between myself and Greg and Russ to answer questions as they come in. And so we'll ask that folks, use the chat to pose questions. You can raise your hands and we'll try and be disciplined about sort of stacking those questions as it were. And as was mentioned previously, it's a really dense conversation with lots of really interesting topics. And so we ask you to sort of play the classic step in, step out. If you're the kind of person who's very comfortable, speaking in a group setting, then, make sure that you're making some space for other folks to speak. And if you're one of those folks that have a hard time speaking up, please be brave with us today. We are asking also that you kindly, focus on the experiences that you've had and try not to generalize. It's really important for us as a project team to be able to sort of call out the specific experiences that we're hearing through this community process. And we do that primarily through these meetings, but also through comments that come in through the app, through survey responses, etc. And I mentioned before that we may ask you to use the Zoom hand feature, because if you're just raising your hand at the camera, it's possible that we might not be able to see you depending on how many folks are on the camera here. So if we could advance the slide to the next, I'll just do a little bit more of a frame up before I'll hand over to my colleagues who did a lot of this really deep analysis work today. In this breakout specifically, we're going to be talking about what we call sort of physical solutions. And you'll see that they're sort of color coded. The ones that they're grayed out are not going to be a discussion in this breakout. They're a discussion in the other breakout. But in addition to things that you can sort of touch with your hands, that's what I mean by physical solutions, we're also going to be talking about policy interventions, development of programs, or governance decisions that make it possible for the physical solutions that we'd like to see to happen. And, for folks, there's such a diversity of folks here on this call, people with really deep expertise and lived experience in this work. So we would really love to see how you see yourself, your organization, whatever group you are affiliated with, showing up in terms of the success of this action plan. Next slide, please. So you'll see here, we'll come back to these questions as we're moving through, but these are some of the prompts that we have for you in terms of feedback and in terms of how we can further refine the recommendations that are moving into this action plan. We want to know, is the stuff that we've come up with like jive with your vision of what a resilient future looks like for our region? Is there anything glaringly missing? Did we not hit the mark somewhere and you really want to name it for us? Hey, you really don't seem to have said X. Please name those things for us. In some instances, they could be addressed somewhere else, and we want to be able to, assuage your concerns that we have identified those challenges as well in our analysis. What do you think is most important? What should we prioritize? And are there other areas where you have concerns about, implementability of something, feasibility, cost, etc.? Next slide. And so at this point, I will turn it over to Greg and Russ to share a little bit about how we are framing up these collections of solutions in the built environment space. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Natalie. And thanks to everyone for joining.
As Natalie said, we want this to be a very collaborative event tonight. That is basically an extension of the collaboration that we've seen over the past year plus on this project itself. And this has really led us into this visual that you see here on the screen that Sue had a chance to introduce in the main session before we entered the breakouts. And what we're going to see with the physical solutions tonight is definitely a similar type of layering approach, and building in those redundancies so that we can essentially look at transforming this region and keep growing this region through that kind of regeneration concept here. So just wanted to reiterate this image and keep that in mind as a thread that ties our work together. And hopefully you'll see that theme come through with the preferred actions here. Next slide. So before we actually dive into the actions and how we break those down, we wanted to provide a little bit of context for how we came up with our preferred solutions. And Yasmin did a really nice job of presenting the contextualization of the region on slides earlier. And so I wanted to kind of revisit some of those elements and how they influence the selection of our actions here. The first and foremost is this map shows industrial and transportation infrastructure within and properties within the region. And what really comes out to us is that we have a lot of sections of the waterfront that are industrialized. Not only is transportation a really important aspect of this area, as Yasmin mentioned, but a lot of the properties along the waterfront historically have been industrial and remain in industrial and critical infrastructure uses today. And so that really influences not only how we think about protecting that area, but where we place that protection. Next slide. Similarly, as we think about coastal protection and flood risk reduction and resiliency, we can kind of counter that with some of the publicly owned impervious surface areas, which again, we see a lot of this public space along the waterfront. This provides not only a concern that we have to think about, but an opportunity for us as we've laid out potential resiliency actions and solutions, especially as we emphasize things like getting more access to the waterfront, which we've heard from all of you throughout this entire process. So we're working to really bring those elements into our proposed plan. Next slide. As a stormwater engineer by training, this one was very enlightening to me. This image shows that historical fill that Yasmin talked about before as well, but we've layered on our drainage solutions to this. And what really kind of comes out to us from a challenge and opportunity perspective as we think about our physical solutions is the need to connect drainage from these existing coastlines to these new coastlines that were created because of this historical fill. That certainly presents some challenges that we all have experienced personally through this region, but that also, I would say, presents areas that we focused on when we looked at drainage improvements to help address that. And then the last slide in this series is focused on green infrastructure. And that was a comment that we've heard from many of you throughout the process, is the desire to focus on green infrastructure, the need for more green space, not only for flood risk resiliency, but also for the other multiple benefits associated with it. And so this shows a lot of the completed, ongoing, or planned green infrastructure work throughout the region, and it serves as a basis for that momentum that we can build in the expanding green infrastructure implementation throughout to address a number of different needs. And so these slides are just intended to provide a bit of context as we go into our preferred solutions. As you go to the next slide, Greg. What you'll also see as we step through our preferred solution is these different icons that were identified previously. This is a jumping off point for us to talk about implementation as well. And so we've identified some of the critical key players involved in advancing these types of solutions. And we've tried to orient these solutions around different actions that can be taken so that we can move right into that implementation. So you'll see these icons listed on these slides as we step through the different solutions. Next slide. Perfect. So what are we talking about today? Well, up to this point, we have, through our other community meetings, we have talked about solutions that kind of oriented around these three primary categories. We're responsible for addressing flooding holistically. And as mentioned before, that involves coastal flooding due to storm surge or sea level rise, but that also involves stormwater flooding and groundwater flooding as well. And so we'll be talking today along these similar lines: coastal solutions, drainage solutions, and green infrastructure. And at this point, I'll pause to allow a space to change if needed interpretation, but also to give everyone a chance to choose where we start in this discussion.
Feel free to put your choice either into the chat or raise your hand and we can discuss.
And then right before we switch, I can change the interpreters.
Okay.
Before we decide where we're going.
All right. I see a vote for green infrastructure and also for stormwater. I think a great place to start then is potentially within the drainage section. How does that sound, Greg?
Sounds good. Please excuse me switching through the other slides quickly.
And then I'll just switch the interpreters while you're doing that. We should be good. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. So I'll kick off this discussion about our drainage solutions, and stormwater is certainly an important element of our resiliency plan, one we've spent a lot of time looking at and talking about. The visioning report kind of helped frame the types of solutions that we wanted to see throughout the region, but the risk assessment that we did as well, which will be presented shortly on the website, was a key element of identifying solutions as well for addressing stormwater flooding. Stormwater flooding, as you all know, is particularly challenging because of the frequency and the geographic distribution of that flooding. It happens everywhere, and based on a lot of the storm events that we've seen recently, especially from Ida last year, but also some of the storm events that we've already seen this spring, it has resulted in localized stormwater flooding. And so it certainly presents a specific challenge for us through this project. Also, there's a lot of actions being taken for drainage solutions in the area. A lot of this is based around water quality, addressing combined sewer overflows. And there's currently long-term control plans that have been developed for the region to reduce these combined sewer overflows that we have factored into our plans as well. So let's start, Greg, by going through some of the drainage solutions. This is the draft recommendations as it relates to drainage specifically. And you'll see all the solutions presented on here, but we will work to step through these individual key actions to kind of help describe this in more detail. And as it relates to some of that terminology that we presented earlier, you'll see ease, protect, and connect being key elements as part of our draft recommendations. So to begin with, this is how we're going to present our actions in our different categories. We have broken these out by kind of similar actions, and we'll start by talking about separating stormwater to safe and dedicated outfalls. We looked for opportunities to get water out of the combined sewer system, with the understanding that a majority of our region is serviced by combined sewers that handle both stormwater and wastewater. These sewers are old and have varying capacity, and it's difficult for a lot of these sewers to be able to handle the rainfall. So we anticipate that a lot of the risk for stormwater flooding, especially localized stormwater flooding, can be related back to the capacity within the existing storm sewer system. So we've identified areas where we would like to separate stormwater from that system and find safe outfalls for that stormwater. That would increase the capacity within the existing system, while also making sure that that stormwater can move out of our flooded areas effectively. This is definitely going to be complicated by sea level rise. And so what you'll see a lot of the separation is where we have more elevation to work with. So you can see on this map, a lot of it is on the west side of Bayonne and Jersey City, as well as looking to take advantage of some key elements within Newark, where we can separate and better connect to the existing ditch system or to larger retention areas such as Branch Brook Park or Weequahic Park. And feel free to interrupt me. I want this to be a good discussion. Ask questions if you'd like as we go through, or post them in the chat.
Russ, if I could just contribute something really quickly, and when we move into the conversation discussion part of this particular session, I think I'll just name that in Newark, when we've had community meetings related to our long-term control plan, and I assume a lot of the folks in this room have also been involved in those meetings in the past. We heard from our residents here in Newark that they wanted solutions that are most effectively solving the problem, and recognize that something like sewer separation, which is incredibly disruptive, you rip up the roads, you add a whole new line, it causes traffic delays, all sorts of things like that, that if that meant the problem was fixed, that they preferred that kind of thing. And so these are the kinds of comments that I would really love to hear. Affirmation, a sense of, elevated concerns from others, because obviously this is a regional plan, it's not just Newark, but noting that those are what we're hoping to hear from you, things that we might have missed, things that feel like areas of concern, things you think are important for us to prioritize. And I just wanted to use that as one example.
That's a great comment, Natalie. And just to add on as well, as part of some of our considerations when coming up with these solutions, there's obviously that balance between impacts, costs, and benefits. Certainly, we considered all those factors into our process as well. And there's some really good benefits too with putting in, for example, high-level storm sewers, separating storm sewers, is that you can capture those benefits sooner, as opposed to having to build out large systems from essentially the bottom up to get to your flooding area. These are opportunities to potentially come in to areas where we have right of way to work in, and really work to kind of get those solutions in place. I see a couple of hands up. So, you know, in the interest of collaboration here, maybe I'll turn to Thomas at Newark.
Hi, thank you. Yes, so this is Thomas Doherty. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Branch Brook Park Alliance. And so I just wanted to chime in because I heard you mention Essex County Branch Brook Park. And so in the spirit of speaking from my experience in working in Branch Brook Park over the last 6 years, we are absolutely in support of the separation of the CSOs because we see firsthand on a regular recurrence every single year, and most recently in the last 2 weeks, when there are these sudden storms, when these CSOs flood and overflow, we have 5 manholes that pop off, and the waters, sewage and those fresh rainwaters combined, flood the landscapes and gush into the lake. And which is, causing additional issues around the harmful algal bloom. So I just wanted to share our experience of working in Essex County Branch Brook Park and seeing these floods and overflows occur. And when those manholes pop off, they then, of course, create hazards for park consumers if we don't get to those manholes soon enough to put them back into place. And then in addition, our public restroom facilities flood and overflow, as well as our education center, which also has just outside of it a massive manhole that we're working towards building a garden bed around just for aesthetic reasons. But it is something that is daunting for us as residents and employees, and as we manage this large 360 acre landscape. The 5 manholes that I referenced are just in one specific area of 4 different divisions, and I know it's happening in other areas as well. So anyway, I'll leave it there. That is my personal experience.
Thank you so much for participating and letting us know that experience, and also, I hope your support as well. And there's Branch Brook is there's a number of elements to our plan that involve Branch Brook Park, and so we'd love to use this as an opportunity to continue the discussion with you on those things. I see a hand up from Adam as well.
Everybody, thank you for the time. I guess I had 2 questions and then just a very quick comment. So I guess the first question I have is really a lot of the deep tunnel corridors. I assume that these are kind of, or I guess I hope that these are kind of being planned with future rainfalls in mind, not 2022 rainfall, but 2040 or 2050 rainfall, because I think, as we all saw even last year, the baseline has shifted very significantly. So I guess kind of a question / concern to raise there, not needing an answer right now. And I guess my other question would be whether, largely because I'm somewhat new to this, whether certain, I guess, government entities in Jersey City specifically are being engaged. I know, for example, I live in the Journal Square neighborhood, and there's a planned park on top of the currently county courthouse or county administration building site, and that building sits on top of a large underground parking garage, and one of the things that I've suggested is perhaps adaptively reusing that underground parking garage as a retention, as a giant retention tank. And I think that the immediate response from a lot of the people in the immediate area was, well, we want parking there. And as a resident of Journal Square for the past 4 years, I've had my basement flooded twice. And it seems to be happening more so now than it did in the first 2 years. So just hoping that, there's a lot of engagement with the city of Jersey City on potential sites like that, where there can be adaptive reuse. And then I think my one very quick comment would be, I think all of these are great and I am fully in support of all of them. I think I would also love to see a focus on maybe preventing the rainwater from getting into the sewer systems in the first place. One of the biggest issues that we have on my street is that we are downslope from Kennedy Boulevard. So all of the water on Kennedy Boulevard flows down into the catch basins on our corner. And when we have heavy rain, it backs up into our basements. We have asked Jersey City to put bioswales at our corner, and it just doesn't seem like there's any willingness to coordinate between the various entities and even the MUA to see projects like that come to fruition, which would hopefully, obviate the need for maybe some of these much bigger ticket items, because you'd be preventing the water from getting into the sewers in the first place, or at least some of it. So just kind of a thought there.
Yeah, excellent comments. We're going to address a few of those in some future slides. I will start by quickly addressing your comment about the future rainfall conditions. And our project did consider future conditions. We projected an increase in rainfall into the future to evaluate in terms of our risk mapping. There's been a few other presentations and other community meetings. If you haven't had a chance to look at those are available on our website, and you could go back and look at some of the mapping that shows and the methodology that shows how that came about. And that's also going to be included in our risk assessment report. So it's a very good point, and one that is included. There's certainly a question on, is it enough? I think that there's a bigger discussion about that from a state perspective too, that we're trying to be sensitive to. But as far as it relates to the individual solutions here, we're identifying very conceptual level plans. There's no design of these yet to determine the exact sizing of these or what they would necessarily manage, but yeah, that would be part of that if these move forward. And then a few of those other comments that you made are things that we've considered. And I think in the interest of time, because I really enjoy this discussion, I think we're going to try to kind of go through some of these solutions a little bit faster, so you kind of see where we came from, and then we'll be able to kind of get into a deeper discussion, which is just fantastic. So on the deep tunnels themselves, oh, Natalie, I see you.
I just want to name that there are a couple comments / questions in the chat. I think at least one of them is a clarification, and then I guess as a matter of process, maybe suggesting that, Lenny, we can circle back to your comment when we have time to do more discussion, and perhaps the question to explain the Bayonne Cloverleaf stormwater retention. Let's just do that now, since it's more, to me, sounds like a clarifying question. Does that sound okay?
Yes. Was that on the previous slide? Okay. So yes. So this is an area where we were looking at the opportunity, and for a lot of these sewer separations, they're only beneficial if we can get water out of the system. And so that's why you'll see these areas being directed to the coastal, the coastal areas. There's obviously a lot of infrastructure that we need to work around within these areas. So as it relates specifically to that area in Bayonne, taking advantage of the right-of-way, the large right-of-way within those transportation corridors to potentially build in retention to those cloverleafs to help mitigate the amount of stormwater infrastructure needed to get water out. That's where we see kind of, it's a theme of ours as we look at these types of projects. It's very similar to using the larger retention at Branch Brook Park, for example, to help mitigate those peak flows and allow us to get water out a little bit more efficiently as it relates to built infrastructure. So I hope that provides a little bit of clarification about that project specifically. And just to reiterate, these have not been designed. We are still at very much a planning level process. And some of these we feel are intended to really kick off that conversation. A good one here are these deep tunnels. We know that they can be disruptive and also very expensive, but in some areas they're going to provide a lot of benefit where we don't have many other great solutions to manage the amount of stormwater. And one key element of this is a drainage corridor spine along the backside of Hoboken as well as the Jersey City downtown, where a lot of flooding is occurring. And so these are examples of these deep tunnel solutions that can help us manage stormwater and also get that stormwater to places where it can be pumped out more effectively.
While we're here, Faith did specifically ask about whether those deep tunnels were combined or separated. So if you just want to address that quick.
Yeah, in most cases, they'll likely be combined. They'll take advantage of the existing combined sewer where we can alleviate some of the capacity limitations within the combined sewer system. And then also we'll be able to store that water temporarily and then pump it back into the interceptor, for example, in Newark for treatment. So where we can, we would love to separate that stormwater and get it out of the system completely. But there are other benefits of maintaining combined sewer tunnels from a water quality standpoint as well. So it does vary a little bit. To quickly kind of move through these other drainage solutions, the next action that we've identified where we think there's some really good opportunities is improving the existing drainage corridors that we have throughout the area. There are a number of these, there's a number of these around Newark, especially around Ironbound. There's a large ditch system there, as well as the peripheral ditch around Newark Airport. And so improving these natural conveyance channels will allow us ideally to get water out of those areas more effectively as well, identify where there's existing barriers to flow and try to open up those barriers to improve the conveyance. Perhaps a little bit more limited in Jersey City and Hoboken, but certainly we want to take advantage of existing right-of-way and other kind of transportation corridors to see if we can identify open channel conveyance solutions that can move just stormwater out of these areas to alleviate some of the flooding. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more as it relates to the Newark Bay Hudson extension of the New Jersey Turnpike. But these are some of the solutions that allow us to try to leverage and improve those existing drainage corridors. And then I believe, Adam, you kind of spoke to an innovative idea to repurpose an underground parking lot. I think that there's going to be a big need to identify lots of different regional retention sites as well through the area. And so we often look at public properties, large parking lots to begin with for these types of practices. And a good example is the Ironbound Resilience Hub, which we've advanced through a FEMA BRIC application as part of this program, where we incorporated a significant amount of stormwater storage within the Ann Street School in Newark, as well as combine that with solar infrastructure, solar power infrastructure there to create a resilience hub. So I quickly moved through those solutions. I do know that we're a bit time limited, but I don't know, Megan, if you've been kind of tracking the comments, if there's any questions that we should pause for.
This might be a good time to circle back to some comments that Lenny was making. And Lenny, I wonder if you're able to unmute yourself and you can sort of share some of the thoughts. But to summarize briefly, there was a question about how the regulations related to development, particularly in redevelopment zones where you can sort of have stronger, rules and so on and so forth. If there was a way to, use that system. And I guess it's a question for Russ and Greg, because you guys know how this is the physical breakout session and we are talking about governance solutions that allow for physical breakouts, or is things around like land use and redevelopment laws and so on and so forth specifically being discussed in the other breakout?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with this, and it might be a good segue into Greg's discussion about green infrastructure.
Okay, thanks.
And so certainly there's a lot of overlap with policy recommendations here, and that helps us move our physical solutions into the private space a lot more. And so we recognize that there's going to be a need to do this work across multiple sectors and different types of property owners and stakeholders. Maybe before I really go any further, I see Lenny's raised his hand. I'll give you a chance to comment here.
Just to interrupt before that, can we just switch the interpreters as they've been going for more than 15 minutes? Okay, thank you for that. Go ahead, Lenny.
Okay, good evening. I guess I was looking at some of the solutions that we've had in the past, and they weren't really connected with future plans and future possibilities. For example, what sticks in my mind is what happened in Willowbrook, where they built the mall and changed the way that water flowed, and then had resultant flooding. That's been a terrible issue for a long time, still is, it seems. And I guess what I'm afraid of here, I see in most of the major municipal areas that we're targeting in this discussion, they have a very robust, I could use a different word, but a building program for high density buildings, which is going to in turn tax the sewer system and probably cause more flooding because it's not really connected with how do we get rid of this water. I was in a meeting one the other day and I said, if everybody flush their toilets or drain their sinks or their bathtubs at the same time, we could have a brown wave going right through the community because, while you're having a storm, that is, because it was not built to take all that type of input. And it seems that we're, okay, after that, we'll work on sewer, but we're not working on the building. So the two are separated and they're not working together. So they just seem to bother each other. They cause problems for the other entity.
Yeah, I definitely understand. I understand what you're saying. Maybe I'll let Sherry weigh in because I saw that she raised her hand as well for this discussion. Hi, Sherry, are you there? I see that she came off mute. Are you there? Okay.
Yeah, I'm there. My mute was up. I'm fairly new to this. How you guys doing? My name is Sherry Brown, and I'm from Newark, New Jersey, and I'm a part of ICC. I am a canvasser for ICC. So this information is very informative. It is new to me. I do understand what he was saying as far as them building Willowbrook Mall and the flooding in that area. I am familiar with the flooding in that area of Willowbrook Mall, as in some areas. Now, talking on a more physical standpoint, like I said, I'm new to this, so I'm not really sure about all of this. I'm fairly new looking at the slides and stuff. I'm like, okay, wow, that's serious. Is there something that can be done to something that these companies or the owners of these companies who build on this land that then floods in other areas, the water is flooding out in other cities or around their city. Can they be responsible for putting down like those bags? I don't know what you call it, but it absorbs water, and then the water is distributed out through the nearby soil and land and grass that will better be for, like, you know, the grass, the trees, the birds, and all of that stuff. Is there more of a natural solution that we can use, or a natural product that these companies have to be responsible for? Because you could just build on a land, but then you're not caring about where that water is going. You're flooding people out of their homes. Now these homeowners will be flooded out of their home. Now they have to find something to do with their insurance company and all of that sort, and then you're not responsible for it. You get what I'm saying? Like, who is responsible for people being flooded out of their homes in these events? Because like what happened not too long ago when we had the storm and the water levels raised up, all of North got flooded, Hoboken, Jersey City, down there in Willowbrook, Plainfield, all these areas got flooded, and that's because the storage was backed up and they didn't have a solution, a physical solution, so that everything can drain properly.
Yeah, some good comments. Lenny, did you have a quick follow-up there?
Sorry, yes. Being from the Ironbound, I guess what I see is the Ironbound is becoming like a fishbowl, and they're building up barriers on certain of the edges of the Ironbound. But instead of getting rid of water, what it does is it keeps the water that falls within the area of the Ironbound in the Ironbound. It's not getting rid of it, which sort of exacerbates any problems with flooding. Plus, there have been some areas that have been flooding for as long as I've been in Newark, and they haven't really been addressed. So to add on top of that more buildings with higher demands on sewer, drainage and that, plus that stops a lot of the absorption because trees are being taken out. There's less green structure and all those things. You're basically building up for disaster. Your building now is going to lead to a problem that has to be solved later on. And that's why I referenced the Willowbrook thing. The mall was great for the people at the time, but it changed the water table so that they had the flooding. Now we have to find a tunnel or something to get rid of all that water. In Ironbound, they were talking about putting in some levees at one point, which would have done nothing more than keep the water that fell within the Ironbound area in the Ironbound area, adding to the flood, as opposed to getting rid of the water.
Yeah, definitely a challenging area for us as we've worked through this program. We've done a number of different site visits and talked to several people from the Ironbound, and we see the risks. We've been able to identify the risks there from a stormwater perspective as well as from a coastal perspective. You're right; it's a bit of a fishbowl, and that's a good way to describe it. It's hard to get water out of that area, and so it's been a particular focus of ours. A couple of things that I just wanted to relay in terms of how we are viewing this, and development is a bit of a double-edged sword, especially in combined sewer areas. One of the challenges in this area is that a lot of those big land use changes have already happened. It's an urbanized area. This region is very urbanized. And so a lot of that natural space has already been converted through development in the past. In fact, a lot of historical fill was, put in place so that the area could develop, and that's caused a lot of problems. These problems are exacerbated now because of the changes that we're seeing within the rainfall patterns. So certainly more development in a combined sewer area will add more people to this region, but, and this is a really important but, it's not necessarily going to change the stormwater problems themselves, because that runoff is generated from those land use changes that have already happened. Redeveloping this area isn't necessarily going to result in more stormwater runoff contributing. And so what we've done through this program is look at that redevelopment as an opportunity. And there's a number of policy elements associated with it. Right now, there's not a lot of opportunities for us to force change on these private developments that maintain themselves in their current condition. There's no regulations that say you need to make these improvements on your property. We can certainly add more regulations and restrictions and requirements on properties that do redevelop to make sure that they are better managing the stormwater so that there's less contributing to the system, as Adam mentioned before as well. Another element through a policy lens is looking at putting in a stormwater utility. And a stormwater utility essentially charges people for what they're contributing to the system that's going to affect people upstream and downstream of you. So it's basically making people responsible for the stormwater that their site is generating, their property is generating, that needs to be managed by all of us in the public space. And so a stormwater utility can force those changes at that private level. It also provides reliable funding source to implement more of these stormwater improvement projects throughout the region. And so that's something that is discussed in the other policy breakout in a little bit more detail. I think that because the area is so developed, we do want to encourage redevelopment. In fact, I see in the comments here that Adam mentioned the other climate change benefits associated from a mitigation standpoint, reducing the amount of cars on the road, taking advantage of the excellent transportation systems that we have in the region, and really providing more of a tax base for us to fund these necessary improvements to improve resiliency within this region. And certainly we want to see that regeneration of the area. We're not looking at abandoning this part of New Jersey. We really want to see the opportunities to improve this area and just build that resiliency in. So those are the things that we balance, that we can talk about a little bit more, especially as it relates to green infrastructure and the opportunities there. And maybe in the interest of time, we can circle back to some of these comments, but for those who do need to sign off potentially here shortly, maybe Greg, you can talk about some of the green infrastructure solutions and approaches that we've taken.
I sure can. We have about 5 minutes left, so this will be a bit abbreviated. I'll probably stay on this a bit longer and then go through the others relatively quickly. So if there are questions at the end of that, we will address them then. But here we're looking at essentially our approach to green infrastructure being distributed and opportunistic, latching on to projects that are already planned or ongoing, like several of the Greenway projects that are cutting through our region. And for example, we just came off of the drainage talk. The Morris Canal Greenway is planning on cutting through Branch Brook Park, and we would associate some of our drainage improvements with that Greenway project in particular. So here what you're seeing are the dotted lines are all of the planned or ongoing Greenway projects, while the solid green lines highlighting streets are essentially the priority streets that we've identified, both because they are within repeat flooding areas, but they also have the space and availability to accept some of these right-of-way green infrastructure projects. Another main feature of this map is this wetland system that you can see throughout Newark Bay and a bit on New York Bay over here. Wetlands can not only improve habitats for local ecology, but they can improve the water quality in local waterways for everyone. So a lot of the dedicated outfalls that Russ was talking about for the separated sewer system can flow into these constructed wetlands, which naturally filter and allow some of that water to absorb back into the ground as well. One last feature of this map that we have talked about throughout our process is a distributed network of resilience hubs. They're talking about this a bit more in the other room, but essentially those would be resource centers for local residents to come and get information, to get one source of flooding truth, whereas right now it's a bit disconnected, and you get different answers from different entities, from the city, the state, the federal government. So we see these resilience hubs as not only information centers, but also having integrated green infrastructure projects such as retention basins, cooling centers, etc., being real staples for these neighborhoods. And they would be located at public buildings, some public schools, some shelter locations, and would essentially be our footprint left on the Northeastern New Jersey region. So the way that we're looking at how we as Northeastern New Jersey can help with the green infrastructure projects in the region is by identifying areas where green infrastructure projects can have impact. So I'm going to step through a series of maps that outline different inputs that we have identified that can help both site and develop green infrastructure projects going forward. So this one, for example, one of the main factors that we look at is how far people are from existing parks and open space. We generally consider a 1/4 mile radius to be feasible walking distance to a park. And as you can see on this map, the brown areas represent areas where people are more than a 1/4 mile from an existing park. So where an intervention can have a greater impact on people's access. Though space might be limited in some of these areas, we see interventions like pocket parks, community gardens, public-private open spaces to help fill some of these gaps. Another main factor, which we touched on a bit in the intro presentation, is the heat island effect. Now, our region is one of the worst regions in the country for this heat retention effect that creates extreme temperatures during the summer months. And as we can see, these high heat areas affect most of the areas of these cities. So this would help to inform where we want to increase tree canopy, where we might put green and blue roofs, where we might put things like the pocket parks, or transform some impervious surface to pervious surface to help alleviate that heat effect. This one is an overlay of 2 of the maps that you also saw in the intro presentation, the impervious surface map in pink below, and within that map, the darker pink areas are all publicly owned impervious surfaces. So they're a bit of the lower hanging fruit that we would be able to address first with some of these projects. The rest of it, the lighter pink, are all privately owned impervious surfaces. And as you heard, anywhere up to 99% of these cities are covered in impervious surface. So this is where we might want to install right-of-way green infrastructure, parks that specifically deal with and retain and detain water during storm events. And then lastly, looking at contaminated parcels. We touched on this a bit also in the intro presentation, but when we can have more co-benefits in our green infrastructure implementation, we would also want to include remediation of some of these sites. Here you're seeing both the red dots that are known contaminated sites reported to the state, but also the black polygons are some, the black shapes on the map are some of the brownfield sites that we have identified within these key areas for co-beneficial green infrastructure. Finally, this is essentially the outcome map of all of those overlays. So with all of those inputs, we know essentially where green infrastructure should go to deal with these individual inputs and issues. So here in the purple, we see the final areas that can address all of them can have the most impact, the most co-beneficial outcomes. So I guess at this point, 3 minutes over, I can open for comment. I have seen a few going through the chat. Are there any that have risen to the top?
Yeah, I've been looking through the chat as well while Greg was speaking. Any questions on kind of the green infrastructure solutions and approaches that we've kind of outlined here?
So as a wrap up, we see this more as a roadmap to hand off to the cities, state and federal agencies, et cetera, when they are trying to install more green infrastructure or site it. They can know the inputs and the factors affecting that area that this green infrastructure can address.
Yeah, and I think what I'll say as a closing thought is just that we do have another session that starts at 6:30. The 6:30 session you've seen already. You were here from 4 to 4:30. It's the same exact thing. So you could skip and just join at 6:30 for a breakout and join a conversation again. Either the same breakout, which will be offered again at starting at 7, or the other breakout on sort of more of the quote unquote non-physical solutions, right? Your education, your outreach, your emergency preparedness activities, all of these things. There's so much here, and we can't do it justice in 90 minutes, but we also don't recognize that people won't come to 3-hour virtual meetings. And we launched this project literally in the middle of 2020. So we sort of from the beginning had to go fully virtual. But for that reason, we have so many mechanisms for folks to stay in touch with us, whether that be virtual, whether that be the app, whether that be surveys. And we are all, really happy to receive email communications or requests for additional information to be shared. Russ or Greg, would you speak to the timeline for when these slides will be on the Brazilian NJ website? And I think I'll do a pitch for the survey again that's in the chat. Please let us know your thoughts by clicking that link that Meg is sharing. Megan.
Yes, and Megan's on as well. Megan Bushlow does not get all the credit that she deserves. She's the one that really pushes a lot of this out. Megan, I assume that these slides will be on very shortly after this meeting. Is that right?
Yeah, we usually post the slides like the next day or by Friday. For the recordings, it takes us a little bit more time to process them, so those should be up next week. If you registered through Eventbrite, we have your email address and we'll send you an email to let you know once it's up. But if you didn't do that, then we might not have your contact information. So if you'd like to get that email update, I encourage you to provide your email address through the link that I just dropped so that we can make sure that we get you the info.
I'll speak for the facilitators. We've been offering these versions of virtual meetings, and often when the conversation is very lively, we stay on a little bit, so we won't, we don't mind staying. But we also need a little bit of a dinner break before the next community meeting. So it's sort of an invitation, but also don't feel like you have to stay. I think maybe we stay for a few minutes, and if anyone else has something else they'd like to share.
Yeah, I'm happy to stay, definitely, especially to answer questions and to continue the discussion.
Awesome. Well, I think that was enough of a pregnant pause for us to go ahead and close.
That sounds great, and really appreciate, Natalie, you setting the stage here as well, and with everything that you've done to kind of help move this through. Certainly, we hope everyone will stay involved. You don't necessarily have to join us again in another hour, but certainly look for these materials to go on the website, and we should have more information on our plan here in the next few weeks.
Thank you so much, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Thank you all.
Everyone.